please silence your cell phones, hold all sidebar conversations to a minimum, and we will get started with People Process Progress in 3, 2, 1. Everybody, welcome to the People Process Progress podcast, episode 26. What is Crisis Intervention Team Training? So I'm going to talk about this. Honestly, I did some research on slavery in America, policing in America, civil rights. I'm not an expert at those. It was a good exercise. It was good to learn about each thing beyond what I had known before. I thought, don't try and make your show fit a situation. Help it fit the progress piece of People Process Progress. And so one thing that's come up in the news from police, from community, from frustrated people, but it's been in existence for a while, is crisis intervention team training. So I'm going to go through the people, where it came from, kind of the process of it, from programmatic development to what's the actual course like. And I'll speak to that. I took that course a few years ago in 2015 or 2016. And then progress, like how can we make progress with this and how do you use it in real life? I've used it in real life in different facets that'll go on. I've seen others use it. It works and it's very simple. It's just like my foundational 4 concept of objectives, organization, resources, and communication. We'll get into these 4 coaching plays, if you will, when, a little bit later in this episode, that is what can you do when you're dealing with someone in crisis. And so always, I appreciate all of you that have listened. Please subscribe if you haven't on whatever platform. We're everywhere: iHeart, Apple, Blueberry, Stitcher, etc. Please also give a rating. If you can do that, it'll help bump us up, get this story out there, get other stories out there, interviews, my 2 cents. I really appreciate everybody that's reached out all over the world. Again, I'm probably tired of hearing it, but I'm always very happy and fortunate that folks from around the country listen to my 2 cents or those of my guests and their experiences. So please do that if you can. So Crisis Intervention Team Training, or CIT training. So where did it come from? And I'm going to do this breakdown too, because I'm in Virginia. I'm in Southwest Virginia. I used to live in Central Virginia. That's where, in the city of Richmond, actually, I didn't live there. I worked there when I took this training and did EMS. But in that Central Virginia area. And so what I'm going to do is kind of break down for kind of the people part, and how it's a little bit different is the national kind of picture of crisis intervention team training. And again, I'll put the resources and stuff so you all can read a lot of this on your own. And in Virginia, how it came to be and how it's expanded and stuff like that. So let's get into it. So where did it come from? So nationally, why, right? What's the why of things? Let's go Simon Sinek on it. Let's go knowing more than just you put this together and that. We want people to do this. So why? It's to provide a safer and more humane response in times of crisis for mental health crisis. So when I use the term crisis here and the term crisis intervention team, largely the focus is a mental health crisis, some kind of breakdown from some condition or some like worst day of your life, lost your job, lost a loved one on the same, you don't have to be. And that's a key component of this that you learn about when you learn more about mental health is you don't have to have a lifelong diagnosed psychological disorder or mental health. We've all had those horrible days, and you could have that one day where you snap and you're in a situation where someone calls to get you help and someone's going to show up. And largely a lot of the time it's police, unless you have a really well built out program where you have behavioral health folks responding. If it's scary or they think it's not secure, police are going to be there. So I'm going to touch on nationally how this was made. And it's a result. The National Alliance on Mental Illness, or NAMI, N-A-M-I, provided some funding, the seed funding, to the Memphis Police Department. So Memphis started this. The first CIT program was Memphis. It was formed in 1988, and it followed a fatal shooting of a man that had a history of mental illness and substance abuse. And so a Memphis police officer killed that person. This was a way to enable another tool in the tool belt and the gun belt of an officer. There's escalation of force. There's all this. Again, I'm not a cop. I know a bit of it. I have family that are and friends. But it was another tool that didn't involve injuring the other person or the police officer, hopefully de-escalating so they don't have to protect themselves. Because again, someone on their worst day and their worst moment could make any decision. Someone with a long history of psychological disorders could make any decision to end their life and maybe want to take someone else with them, or someone that's innocent, whether it's the police officer or the person next to them. So part of this is to de-escalate the situation and get this person to the help, not just a trip to jail or a trip to the mental health facility. And so 1988, Memphis, first program established. And then there's an organization, and I'll quote them a few times, and again, I'll have the links to this. CIT, or Crisis Intervention Team International, in 2005 was established, and it helped grow this program. So there's over 3,000 programs across the U.S., right? That's pretty awesome. And so, again, when you hear about this in the news, that we have to establish this, we have to do this, crisis intervention team training exists in a lot of places across the country. So, which we'll get to later, what could be missing, what's a factor, and whether it works or not. And we'll get into some of those. And not for me, but from the expertise of folks who have established these, which are a coalition of people that set this up. How? So I mentioned, so NAMI, or National Alliance on Mental Illness, funded it, and it was, again, with law enforcement plus mental health and advocates and officials and elected officials, right? We've all got to work together. So that was how the first the first place in the United States, and then CIT International helped that grow. So what about Virginia? So coincidentally, I live, in the New River Valley and in Southwest Virginia now, and the New River Valley CIT program was established in 2001, and it was 14 local law enforcement agencies in 5 localities for the nation's first multi-jurisdictional, rural adaptation of the Memphis CIT model, right? So if you haven't been to Southwest Virginia, there's a lot of mountains and trees and wildlife, and so it's a pretty rural place, pretty spaced out. And so physically spaced out, not necessarily like being spacey. So this was developed using grant funds from the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration, or SAMHSA, over a 3-year period. So, as a project manager, I can imagine, all the components of that objectives, right? The biggest one is to, establish this program. You're pulling together 14 local law enforcement agencies, plus each of them have stakeholders, plus the mental health folks, and then over a 3-year period, and getting this in a lot of the training and establishing the standards and all this stuff. The good thing is they had a model to go from with Memphis, and then they could take that and build how they wanted to. So that was in 2001 in the New River Valley. In 2007, the New River Valley CIT program received Virginia money from the General Assembly to expand the program statewide. So other agencies, other departments, other leaders saw this and said, hey, we should expand that program. And so they did. And then a couple years later, in 2009, there was actually a Senate Bill 1294 in Virginia to support the establishment of crisis intervention team programs in areas throughout the Commonwealth. And then for that year and the next couple of years, they wanted status reports. They said, hey, you have to do this, or it's highly encouraged, or here's the standards, and we want to get metrics on it, right? Metrics, data in, garbage in, garbage out. So what they wanted, though, was to see if we're going to spend these 3 years, if we're going to spend this money, if we're going to put this training together, we want to see how many are trained, how many incidents did you use it. Think of all the different things you would want to measure on the effectiveness of a new behavioral training system, right? Because this isn't, here's how you use this new weapon or this taser. You use this system to identify an issue, talk to this person, establish a rapport, and then redirect them to a system where, police aren't trained in this other than the CIT training they get. A mental health professional's whole job, their whole career, their whole specialty is this. So it's a super hard challenge for law enforcement. I was very fortunate that my EMS agency sent us as lieutenants and me as a captain to this training. So we trained with the police in these scenarios, and then we could use it in the field. I'll talk about that. But you have to think about it. It's just such a great thing. And this was, a few years ago, a decade or so ago, a little bit more, at least for Virginia, a couple decades. And so, that's where nationally it came from. Memphis is what started it after an officer-involved shooting with someone that had mental illness. Virginia in 2001, New River Valley, and then they expanded that throughout the state over the course of the next few years. And there's also been some discussion lately, too, particularly a City of Richmond police officer that shot a man with mental illness. And so as I talk through the structure of this program of CIT, of what it's like. And again, I haven't been charged with someone that's yelling they're going to kill me after they've gotten in a car accident, after they've run, naked through a hotel. So think about if someone's doing that and it's another grown human being, the intent is for someone like that, but can you talk someone down like that? Is that the time to do it? And I'm not going to debate on this, but I want us as citizens to think about this, or if you're law enforcement or fire and anything else, think about that. If you've never been in a fight, if you've never grappled someone, if you've never, been in any actual physical conflict, then you have no idea what you would do in that situation if someone actually charged you. So for all of you that have never done that, I just want you to think about that and think about, yep, there's some techniques that we'll talk about, these 4 coaching plays, these ways to talk people down. But the other key component in this is paying attention and keeping yourself safe while you're trying to de-escalate. CIT is not a magic pill. It's not a special, Green Lantern ring you can pull out and say CIT and it just de-escalates everything. It's one thing to do before you have to do more than that. So I just want anyone that's thinking about, you should have just done this or that. If you've never been in that situation, you've never used this, if you've never done the training, if you don't understand what it's like to be out there in the worst parts of your town, just take a breath and just consider that for a second. Talked about the ground up building of this. What was the impetus for creating CIT training, where it started. So let's talk about both, again, CIT International and then Virginia CIT. What are the outlines of a program? So if you're going to set this program up, and these are from best practice documents, again, both from CIT International and then from Virginia. So CIT International defines a good CIT program as it's community-based with community responses, right? Community, meaning police, mental health, citizens, elected leaders, the public, right? It's got to be a team effort. Everything that's going to be successful in our society has to be a team effort. It includes people living with mental illness and their families, right? So if we don't ever interact with someone that has mental illness or the effect it has on their families until we go on that call, we're not going to understand them. But if we, during training, have that, and we can see the person with schizophrenia or that's, again, just totally stressed out from a traumatic event, or who knows what it is. There's so many different things that could be happening. We need to get that feedback directly from them. What is it like when I show up in a uniform, whether I'm a cop or an EMT or a firefighter or even behavioral health folks? How does that make you feel? How, what has been helpful, what hasn't? And that's just like good lessons learned from anything, like a project or anything. So this is a project. If you haven't established a CIT program, and, I don't know if there's a lot of places that haven't, whether it's localities or police departments, you have to consider that you have to get the feedback of the people you're going to respond to and help, whether it's a mental health person that's going to go out there or a police officer or EMT or firefighter, whatever it is. It has to be based on partnerships and relationships. And again, these are early program definitions, not even just the how to do this best progress piece of it, but that's key. They did a great job in this outline. It is not just law enforcement responses to mental health crisis, right? So right now what we're hearing is CIT training for, that applies to the cases where the call is for someone in distress or crisis, right? And is it drug related, which could be, is it veteran, experience related? Is it chemical imbalance? Is it whatever else? But it's not just the law enforcement part. Everyone has to take part of it. And that's from the CIT International program that would be involved in probably a lot of the places where the people are calling for CIT training these days. CIT International's goals. So let's set some goals. Let's see what their goals are. And again, these are direct from these sources. I will cite them. I don't need to make this stuff up. I'm tacking my 2 cents on here, but I hope it's helpful. So CIT International's goals: to improve safety during law enforcement encounters with people experiencing a mental health crisis for everyone involved. Why? You call 911 when you see someone that doesn't seem like they're acting right, or they're actually being violent, or they're threatening, or they're yelling. So law enforcement is going to be the first folks on the scene. The second goal: to increase connections to effective and timely mental health services for people in mental health crisis, right? So while the folks in blue, the men and women in blue that are out there serving and protecting, which is no joke, hard already, let alone now, let alone with the scrutiny they're getting or working there, they're not the solution. Not everyone needs to go to jail or get, an emergency detention order or, whatever other legal means we can do to get them in a police car, which that makes its whole experience. But it's to get them to mental health, services to solve the problem, right? And mental health's come up not just now with, the protests and the riots from police killing, but it's also been talked about with school shootings, right? So mental health is not just as some, police brutality focused thing or improving policing or whatever it is. It's also for the regular citizen, for the teenager that wants to go grab a rifle and go shoot a school up, right? How do we recognize that earlier? How do we de-escalate that? How do we do all these things? So it's multifaceted. The third goal, CIT International, to use law enforcement strategically during crisis situations, such as when there is an imminent threat to safety or a criminal concern, and increase the role of mental health professionals, peer support specialists, and other community support. So, strategically, how could we have the, law enforcement available, but not send them right in because maybe that person, is afraid. Maybe they did have a bad experience with law enforcement, or they're in such crisis. Anyone coming near them, uniform badge or not, is just going to set them off. A good example of great work using CIT that's an imminent threat to that person's self is like a jumper, a person that's on the edge of a bridge or standing at the railing, and police are first on scene, and you want to talk about a delicate situation. You have to try and not be the last person that person talks to and talk them off back over the railing, or talk them to get close enough and grab them. Just all these things. Just think about the burden that is on law enforcement. And remember earlier, it's not just on them, but they will be the tip of the spear, so to speak, at the CIT intervention to then get them to help with mental health. The fourth goal from CIT International is to reduce the trauma that people experience during a mental health crisis and thus contribute to their long-term recovery. Think about how traumatic it is. Say you have no history of mental illness, but you've just had that series of unfortunate events and you just are overloaded, especially now, locked up with COVID, right? Protests and riots all around you, whether you participate or not, whatever. And then something else happens, something big. You lose your job, you're laid off, and you're just, you could have so many different kinds of crisis. And so say the solution is, someone calls and they say you need help. And the solution is that the police come to get you and you're combative because you're so upset. Well, no one's going to let you just hit them because you're having a crisis, right? So then you are going to get in an altercation. Then something is going to happen, and that's not going to be a good experience, even if you get help, right? So using these plays, these techniques, setting up these programs is very helpful to help de-escalate that situation when possible. And again, I've said when possible and quantified that because you can't always de-escalate a situation. You just can't. So this is one tool. Again, it's one process. It's one program that can be used. It's just being touted a whole lot now. So I think it's important to share, what is this? How could it help? How can we use it? And what are some examples of when I've seen it used, either by myself or other folks that I've worked with? So let's look at, in Virginia, CIT. Now I'm going to get into the essential elements of a CIT program that Virginia uses. A lot of crossover, right? So this is specific to, the one I said for CIT International is programmatically kind of big level definition goals. This is how you should structure, or how Virginia is structuring these classes. Virginia CIT, community stakeholder collaboration and oversight, right? Same as the international thing, same as every other program, has to be community collaboration. It can't just be law enforcement driven or just community driven. It has to be together. A CIT coordinator, so have someone in the department, in your program, that this is their job, or a large collateral duty, right? You coordinate the training, the implementation, case reviews, everything that goes with good program management, good coordination, is to establish a CIT coordinator. And part of these standards are from the Department of Criminal Justice in Virginia, Behavioral Health Department for Virginia as well helped establish these. The training is 40 hours, right? So it's a full work week. And that part, you have to do that to be DCGS certified in Virginia. So anyone that takes this class, it's an actual full week class. You're going Monday through Friday, which is no small thing. So think about the practicality of scheduling that. If it's patrol, if it's sergeants, lieutenants, fire, police, EMS, whoever, you're pulling people for an entire week straight, back to back. It's not one day this week, one day. You have to do it back to back as well. Train the trainer classes. So that way you have your coordinator, they get train the trainer, they train the trainers. And what that means is I'm going to train you to then be able to teach this class as a trainer, and then we can keep this program going. Dispatcher training, right? Because the first responders, as we say, are 911 dispatchers. So when they get a call and someone's in crisis and they call 911 instead of the suicide hotline or something else, or the person is calling about the person in crisis, that 911 dispatcher can help walk them through maybe some steps to help the other person or talk to them on the phone. Policies and procedures. Got to have those, right? Hopefully they're pretty actionable and easy to look at, not, 200 page things, but, when should we use this? How should we use this? How are we going to do case reviews? But as part of your program, it's how are we going to implement all these things? And then what are the policies of when you have to use it, when you should use it, and all that kind of stuff. therapeutic assessment location, not a law enforcement jail, but that means can we get someone in crisis to a place where they can talk to a mental health professional and as quickly as possible, if they're not posing a threat to others or themselves. And, again, that's in lieu of incarceration because the solution is not to jail, right? There's plenty of folks in jail that have mental health issues. There's been a lot of, over the decades, defunding of mental health where there were whole hospitals, and there's horror stories of some of the hospitals, but, some of the hospitals did great work, but it was deemed not as important now, and it keeps coming back. So the good thing for this program, and particularly Virginia's outline, is it shouldn't be a jail, right? We shouldn't just be scooping you up and taking you to jail. We need access to another place, but they're also got to balance how many places are there available. So when you establish a system, or if you have one, got to consider that. Collection of data. So I mentioned this to monitor outcomes, right? So we need to monitor, how is this program working? How are our interventions? How did it work with this case? Did it de-escalate? Did it go to violence? Did it go to self-harm? All that kind of peer review. And so that's Virginia's CIT essential elements that are built into the programs for the Virginia crisis intervention team trainings. And so that's kind of the people component, folks that were involved in establishing this, folks that coordinate these programs, what are the standards they use, what are the goals they should aspire to when you establish and maintain the program. So now I want to get a little deeper into the process of a CIT. Before I do, I want to get into the process of subscribing to the podcasts. Thanks so much. Please do that. Give us a rating. More stars is better. Share this training, share this information, share these links, or I hope you do, and I thank you all for doing that so far. So let's get into the process piece of this episode. So I'm going to do a training overview. I touched on some of this because Virginia's CIT gets into that, but we're going to break those out further. So when you take crisis intervention team, I mentioned it's 1 week, you're going, people are encouraged to wear street clothes, right? Not just be in uniform all the time so that you're not in a super official feel. It kind of changes the environment. And the class is typically taught by that CIT coordinator, which could be law enforcement, or we had trained the trainers that were EMS lieutenants or captains. I think ours are all captains, or whoever got into it. And so, that's who's teaching it. And it's, you can do the polo cargo pant thing, which is very public safety-ish. But that's how it happens. And so it's 40 consecutive hours. Like I mentioned, it's 1 full week, and you shouldn't have any more than 30 per course. The student to instructor ratio needs to be pretty good because as we're going to get into, there's a lot of practical application, you will break the ice really fast in this class, which is great. I mean, that's what needs to happen. That's part of the biggest challenge. That's the whole reason for this, is recognizing crisis and communication and helping with that communication. So the class has to be book and practical application work, right? So didactic wise, so slides, teaching, stand-up stuff. It's a combination of, and this isn't the exhaustive list, but it's mental health, meaning what are different mental health maladies or ailments or conditions that you may experience or that are out there just as a general knowledge. Substance abuse. What are the different drugs? What are the drugs that folks with mental health have to take, and how do they affect them, right? Some of the medications people take make them constipated all the time and they're in pain, so it doesn't really help their affect, but it helps their balance. Whereas, there's just the medications that we have given, or some that we give, or the combination of them, don't make people feel great. So when they're also having a crisis, that compounds it. And so what psychiatric meds? So I mentioned that. What verbal de-escalation skills? So you talk through what we're going to practice for the rest of the course, how you can do that. Veterans issues, particularly, for almost 2 decades now, we've been at war between Iraq and Afghanistan and other places. And so dealing with veterans, and I've had a few calls with folks, whether it was domestic violence or suicidal thoughts or tendencies, and it's a different element, right? We hear about veteran suicide rates, which is horrible. As a veteran myself and someone that's been out there and responded to those calls in a different uniform, not my Navy uniform, it's super hard, right, to do that. But, we cover a lot of that in the course, in the CIT course, on how to help talk folks through it. And the good thing is that, again, those 4 coaching plays we'll get into, they apply across the board, right? Just like the foundational 4 apply to project management, incident management, whatever else, you can use these plays. And I'm going to give those examples, whether it's a veteran crisis or a medication thing or, whatever it is. It's just knowing, hey, the underlying issue might be this instead of that. Another key component of this training is that for Virginia, at least, to be credentialed as a law enforcement officer to take it, and there's localities that I know, and I reach out to some of my friends today, where they're police, fire, and sheriff. Everyone takes it, right? But you have to be certified for criminal justice. Included in this course in the didactic piece is civil commitment. So, good citizenship, doing the right thing, laws, and then 2 hours also of cultural diversity. So that's already built into the program. So I will be interested in police reforms that, at some level are going to come out of, all the protests and riots from the killing of George Floyd. Will that change? Will that increase? Will the material, will the time span stay at 2 hours of cultural diversity and then the focus change? I don't know, but, for a program that already exists, that's been brought up quite a few times in the news or, other discussions, that seems like an area that's probably going to be looked at and maybe relations there. So, and maybe you could build that when we get into kind of scenario work, throw components in there, mix different races doing calls together. And again, because part of this healing is going to be real discussions, right? Real scenarios, real training, real world stuff. But yeah, so didactic includes that already. So I'll be interested to see if that changes. The other piece for Virginia CIT structure, and again, I'm using this breakdown at this level because that's what I went through, is experiential, right? So you're going to go to site visits. You're going to go to mental health care facilities. You're going to go to therapy groups. They're going to come to you in a room, talk about their, they have 2 personalities or 7, or they hear voices, or they try to commit suicide, or they were abused, or, what that has caused for them, what traumatic event has caused for them to deal with now. And you're going to get it straight from the people that are dealing with that. You're going to get straight from what their life is like at the center, right? And so it's not comfortable for everyone. I was a corpsman in EMT, so I'm very comfortable around folks with either various physical injuries, ailments, and I dealt with and worked in the psychiatry ward a few times, so I was exposed to it. It's not always 100% comfortable, but it's a great exposure, great experience, both for them and you. And again, this is much heavier CIT completed by law enforcement than fire EMS, from what I know. But, it's also good for them to see, hey, I'm here and I'm doing this training because I want to get better at it, right? And again, there's always a percentage where folks have to go to it, like any other training. But, that's the whole impetus for departments putting a lot of time and a lot of money into this. Because remember, now we're paying all these people going to this class for 40 hours a week. So it's another consideration as there's, chatter, which I think is frankly ridiculous, about defunding or disbanding police departments. And they've thrown those are 2 different words, but they keep being thrown around by the media. Because folks have no idea the depth of that unless, you've at least been exposed to or particular been a law enforcement officer. So consumer and family presentations. So you're going to hear from relatives, family members of folks that have committed suicide, that have been in crisis, that have hurt themselves, that are incarcerated, all these different things. Again, you need to get their perspective so when you're on the street and it's 95 degrees and you're frustrated and this person's screaming at you, but they're not really a threat, how you can de-escalate it. And that's not a made-up scenario. That happens all the time. You need to, as part of that program, it's suggested, but this is what I did. There's an exercise called Hearing Disturbing Voices by Pat Deegan. And Pat Deegan has schizophrenia, so she developed this program where you have an iPod and you put these, the earbuds in, and you just start hearing nothing really. Then you start hearing every now and then a word on one side, and then the left side, like, oh, hey, what? Why are you doing that? Whispers. And then you start hearing, you're dumb, you're ugly, what? Why would you say that? And it's like your mind's having an argument with yourself, but you're not doing it on purpose. And while you do this, and I would advise everyone to look it up. When I Googled it, I was trying to find the recording of it. I don't know if I could play it here or not, but Anderson Cooper, I guess, did this exercise a few years ago. So if you Google Hearing Disturbing Voices by Pat Deegan, you'll see that and probably get a little more exposure to the audio piece of it. But it gives you insight to your mind, as they say, playing tricks on you, but your mind deciding things that you're not consciously deciding, and then saying hurtful things to you at the same time they're lifting you up. And it's really disturbing. It's really insightful, though. And at the same time you're doing this, you have to write, I forget the exercise, but you have to write like all 50 states, I think. And then you have to put these like diamond-shaped pieces of wood together in the shape of a fish. Then so basically you're trying to do functions by using your brain, and again, I'm not a pro that thinks through, problem solving like that, or just memory recall while you're getting bombarded with these voices. It is, like I said, super eye-opening. I would suggest anyone that has access to this training or that exercise to do it, to give you an idea of folks that have schizophrenia, however it's induced or something like that. The other thing we did in that program is we watched this documentary called The Bridge, and it's about, for folks, if you don't know, the Golden Gate Bridge has a lot of people that have jumped off of. According to SciComm.net, where there's an article about Kevin Hines who survived jumping off the Golden Gate Bridge, so over 200 feet, going up to like 75 miles an hour and hitting water is not good, and he broke, vertebrae and ankles, and we heard a little bit of his story. But it says since it was erected in 1937, more than 1,700 people are estimated to have jumped off that bridge, off the Golden Gate Bridge, which is pretty astounding. So it's a super depressing, it's probably one of the most, if not the most depressing documentary I've seen, probably because it's real, right? It's people on the bridge. You see them make that decision in their mind. Some just climb the rail and just jump. Some climb the rail and stand there and hold on. And then do it. Some climb the rail, stand there, hold on, and then are talked back off. Some get snatched by folks pulling them back up. But what it does is it really shows you a window into, people make that decision to end their own life, and in particular there, right? Whether it's because it's public or they know it's largely final, or whatever reason. But again, it's a window into mental health crisis. But I highly recommend it. Again, it's very educational because they talk through mental health issues, and they talk with Kevin Hines, who survived him jumping, and so you get a lot of good insight there. So we watch that. So that's part of the experiential, and then practical, right? So this is where the rubber meets the road. This is where you get pushed out of your comfort zone, and it starts with a build-up, super basic scenarios. So you've already gone through the slides that teach you the 4 plays, and so we'll just do one of the plays. Let's just work on one. Okay, now 2, some intermediate. The instructors that I had were fantastic, because they know how to set the scenarios up. They've done it so long, both in real life and for training, that they set the scenarios up where they expect you to use just this one primarily, or these couple, and then eventually advance. It's full blown. You have to be dynamic and use whatever plays you can. And again, not everything fits in these 4, the 4 plays. So that's where you have to get into. They want to see how you adapt to the situation. So it's like any great training. We got to give you some slides. We're going to have some discussions. We're going to give you some exercises. Now we're going to do this for more than one day, right? You start off doing exercises pretty quickly. And really to that, let me give you the class outline from Monday through Friday. So on Monday, you get that intro to CIT, you get the basic mental health, and then you do the hearing voices exercise. So your first day, you're getting, a lot of information. You're going to do that exercise. You're like, whoa, this is something. Tuesday, second day, site visits. That's when you're going to see folks that have been in crisis, that the family of folks that have been in crisis or maybe taken their own lives or have substance abuse issues. And then Wednesday, you're getting right into your basic skills. You're starting to use those. You're getting more heavily into both learning more and applying the 4 coaching plays, and you're doing those basic role play exercises. Thursday's intermediate, and then Friday's advanced. So you have to pass the scenarios. You can't freak out. You can't freeze up. You can't, break some of the cardinal rules, so to speak, that set people off that we'll get into here in a little bit. But you have to go through all these to get your PIN and be certified and get your certificate in crisis intervention team training. So it is an outstanding training, but like every other training, it depends on how the person does or doesn't apply it in the real world, right? But for training, I would say the Tactical Combat Casualty Care course and then the instructor course and the CIT training are the 2 best realistic trainings I've had in the past decade or so, because it makes you feel like you were in a situation with someone in crisis. Like the instructors role played, which you couldn't tell they were instructors. Someone digging up moon rocks that fell from a satellite in their backyard and also happens to have a knife, and then they pick up a baby. Like, no joke stuff. And the thing is, a lot of the scenarios, like the one I just said, sounds off the wall, but a lot of the scenarios are from real incidents. So again, here's a window into the world of police and public safety. Is this crisis intervention team training is really good, But some of these scenarios, even in practice, can't end with just a talk. And that's unfortunate. But that's also a reality that you get out of this class. It's really, again, it's outstanding. So I've talked about these 4 plays. Let's get into what they are, right? They're the 4 coaching plays. And so the principle of these, when you'll notice if you've done communication training or, you're in the business world even, these have to do with just communicating well to and from other people, listening to listen, not just to answer, those kind of things. And so key principles of these plays or of CIT and applying this to be empathetic, not sympathetic, right? So I'm not going to give you sympathy and, oh, you poor dear, I'm so sorry, but, I can feel your pain. I can see the anger. I can, that, right? So you're going to show them empathy, empathize with them and understand, but not be sympathetic for their plight necessarily where you're looking down on them. Be sincere and genuine, right? When you're on the street or you're in a shelter with a kid that isn't eating because his mom's taking all of his behavioral health drugs because she keeps saying that he's a problem, but he's really just as hungry. Again, not fake. You need to be real, right? And that's a different scenario, but you need to be real because it's that person's maybe worst day of their life. They don't want sugarcoating. They don't want just a pat on the head and condescension. They want you to talk to them for real. You have to be accepting. Now is not the time for you to judge why this person's there, short of they committed a crime. If they're next to someone they just attacked, that's a whole different thing, right? If it's someone that is just really upset, they haven't hurt themselves or anybody else, they're not threatening, and even if a little bit they are, just like the don't come near me kind of thing, but if they're not saying I'm going to kill you or I'm going to do this, you have to be accepting and not sit there and look really judgmental, because you all know that. If I'm listening to you and acting like I care, but then I'm judging you with my eyes, that's a horrible conversation to have. You want to use I statements, right? You connect with it, not, the department, the agency, the city, I am here. I can see this. I hear what you're saying. You know what I mean? So it makes that connection just like when you're talking to somebody else. But, and probably most importantly, which maybe could be number 1, just going in the order, from the curriculum, is you have to maintain situational awareness and safety, right? Just because I want to try and de-escalate it, and I'm going to wear my EMT hat because I've been in this situation, just because I want to try and de-escalate and not get into a scuffle with you, right? Whether it's in your house or on the street or somewhere else, doesn't mean that you might not decide that you want to come take a swing at me. Right? So I am not going to be 2 feet from you with my hand on your shoulder, right? I don't know what weapons you have or anything, and let alone if you are a police officer and folks may already have negative intentions or negative thoughts about you. And again, the uniforms that we wore in some fire war too, they're button downs with badges too, right? And some people don't care. So you have to maintain your distance. And here's a great analogy that I picked up in jiu-jitsu, and probably I'm sure it's taught in other fighting places or, police academies. There's a green zone and a red zone. The red zone is anywhere that person can reach me with their arms and legs or something that's in their hands. The green, and the greener zone for talking to someone is outside that space. Right. If it comes to it where they're attacking you, the green zone then becomes if you can grapple, and police, knowing how to do what they do, is right up against them. But again, you don't know what that is. So stay out of reach of their hands and feet and heads and have a good discussion and do those other things that we mentioned. But your situational awareness and safety has to come into play. It has to be first and foremost every time you go on a call. The plays. Let's get into them. First thing you want to do, just like you would do being a good person to another person, is introduce yourself. Crazy, right? I'm Kevin Pinnell. I'm an EMT with blah, blah, blah. I'm John Smith. I'm a police officer with blah, blah, blah. That's it. I'm going to tell you exactly who I am, so I'm not just standing here with a name badge or a nameplate and talking to you, at you, down to you, whatever. I'm here to make a connection with you because we need to help you get out of this crisis. That's the mindset. Play number 2, get their name, right? Get the individual's name. Starting with, can you tell me your name? You don't have to be like, what's your name? Tell me what it is. But can you tell me your name? Hey, I don't know what to call you. What should I call you? Right? Easy things to do in a tense situation a little hard, but this initiates the conversation. I'm telling you who I am. I just want to know what to call you. I don't have to call you by your given name. What do you want to be called? How can I address you? How should I address you? Right? What's your name? Those kind of things. The third thing, express what you see, hear, or were told. Pretty straightforward. You look upset. You look really angry. I can hear that you say that you are, all these kind of things, right? Again, we're keeping it real, right? We're not, oh man, it's all right. Like, we're not doing that. That's what fake people that have fake conversations do. And when someone's in mental crisis, that is not helpful. So we've introduced ourselves. We've asked them for their name or what they want to be called. We've expressed that we see this or that, right? We see that you're upset, you're sad, you're angry, something. I see that you have these things sitting over there. I see this or that, right? And summarize what you've heard. So like a good conversation, I'm going to come into the conversation listening. I'm going to introduce myself. I'm going to listen to you. I'm going to note some things that I notice or that you've told me. And the fourth play is I am going to summarize what you've heard. So I hear that you're saying you're angry because that doesn't put my words in their mouth, right? It's I am summarizing what I believe you just told me or you expressed, right? It lets them know you're listening. That lets people know you're listening when you're having a regular conversation, right? Oh, wait a minute. Tell me about that thing that I just heard about, right? It's just good conversation. So these four coaching plays are the actions you take in these different scenarios. And it's not you don't just keep repeating the same thing, but that happens in training. It happens in real life, right? You're stressed out and your mind's locked on four plays, not foreplay, the four coaching plays. So that's what we want to do when we get into these situations where we're helping someone in crisis. Again, we're helping someone in crisis, right? And so some tips that go with that is to avoid statements like calm down or relax or no big deal. You have no idea what that person's gone through in their past life that's led to this, that they go through every day, that just happened to them. You have no idea. So again, don't give those condescending 1 or 2 word things to people. Avoid how you doing. In fact, in the curriculum, it's like Joey Buttafuoco, but coming in and be like, hey, how you doing? What's going on? Right? They're not having a good day. They don't need the jokey coming in there like that. Avoid saying you understand. This is a big one in general too, but particularly here, someone in crisis. Have you lived their life and been through their situations and had their calamities? If you haven't, you saying you understand is disingenuous and it's not helpful. Now, I had cancer. If someone's upset because they have terminal cancer or their husband does or something, could you emphasize, I see you're upset, and you get to the point and they say, yeah, they told me I have 6 months or something going on or whatever it is. And you say, what, I had cancer. I remember what the fear's like. It's not the same as yours, right? So there's a connection just like you make with someone when you have a conversation, but I'm not BSing that person and saying, oh, I understand. Yeah. Well, have you had that? No. Boom. You just broke the trust, right? Don't say you understand. You could use similar experiences or the same, but if you've never gone through what they're doing, you don't. The other thing in here is a handshake, right? That shows trust these days with the pandemic. Do we fist bump? Do we do elbows? Again, safety and security. Do I get within that reach before it's time to either get a ride with the ambulance or the police car or maybe social services or whoever can give the person that ride to get help if they choose to go somewhere or if it's in their best interest to have to be taken somewhere. And sometimes that happens. What do we do there? And that's at the discretion of the person dealing with this person in crisis, right? So we talked about kind of the people that established this program. We've talked about the process and kind of got, deep into what is the class like? What do you go through? And so now I want to get to what are some real world applications. And I touched on some of these in instances where I've seen this used, where I've used it myself, or, where we did talk about this based on real cases in the class. So the first one is violent people. So I mentioned this. There was a shooting a couple years ago in the city of Richmond. There's been other shootings of people in mental health and in crisis. So the moment when someone is running at you and attacking you and says they are going to kill you or they're going to do things is not the moment to stand there and say, hi, I'm this person. What's your name? Oh, I see that you're upset. Oh, in summary, you would like to kill me, right? That's not it. So again, think about when right now it's on everyone's mind. Think about those scenarios and think about practically what you would do, what you could do. Is CIT the best thing to do there? And again, this is my outsider's view because I'm not a cop and that hasn't happened to me. But if you're just thinking practical for a second, I'm not going to use the 4 coaching plays on someone that's screaming they're going to kill me and they're running at me naked. It's just not going to happen. So earlier interventions, could that have helped before that person, kind of got spun up more or whatever happened? Maybe, and hopefully so. And hopefully in the future, it helps tons of people. But you have to think about, is there someone that's saying, don't touch me, and they're just staying away, but they're not attacking anyone, they're not rushing anyone? Pretty viable, right? They're really upset. Could it spark something, how it goes? Yeah, and that's a touchy situation. But you can talk people down that way. And it's happened before. And I say that not for me doing it, but other people have done that. Offended people. This was not even really a person in crisis, but I used the 4 plays on someone where one of my colleagues they were trying to talk to the family member, doing a report, or rather an assessment, trying to figure out what's wrong with them. It was an EMS call, and they happened to say, hold on, sir, and they put their hand up, and not in really a mean way, not spiteful, and that person became very offended, right? It wasn't in their face, it wasn't anything like that, but, it was don't put your hand up, man. It was, got to de-escalate. I happened to be there with them, talk to the person, 4 plays, just talk to them, de-escalated, right? So that's another thing when you're on a call, whether you're a mental health person, whether you're a public safety person, whether you're just someone that's trying to help in a situation, is you got to think about, your mannerisms, your physical mannerisms, your face, your body language, right? Are you coming in aggressive? Are you letting your frustration out? It all has to do with how effective these are or are not. Youth. So I mentioned, getting called somewhere where a young man was trouble, right? He's always causing trouble. And so we get there and we're at a shelter, church-based shelter. And really, it turns out he's sitting over there, he's crying, he's upset. And then we see his mom, going in and out of the bathroom with this big bag of medicine. Whether she was taking them or not, I don't know. Didn't test her for that. We were there for the child that was, air quote, a problem. And coming to find out, one of my colleagues sat down, 4 plays a bit different with youth. Hey, I'm so-and-so, there you do get down on the level. You kneel down, you get a little closer, right? Could they lash out? Sure. But less dangerous than another grown man running at you, right? Or woman. So come to talk to it, he hadn't eaten. He didn't eat regularly, right? He probably wasn't having a great experience with his life at that moment, with a lot of things at that moment. And so you can still establish rapport. Here's who I am. Here's, what's your name? What do you call? I can see you look like you're really upset. You're sitting there, crying and we're called to maybe come and help you. Right. And try and talk to that person. Sometimes they won't talk. He didn't want to talk a whole lot, but then you can also, through your situational awareness, observe the entire scene, right? What's happening. One of the huge frustrations in public safety, and again, police see this more than I have, is sometimes you can't do anything about that. Right? You want to spirit people away, give them all the food they want, give them a place to live, clean clothes, get, their mom help if they have substance abuse issues. And sometimes you can't, and there's not a mechanism for it. And so, but what you can do is in that moment, make it better for that person you're interacting with. In your home, I have used the 4 plays or parts of them with my kids, with my wife, 100%. Right? Now, I don't have to tell my wife my name or ask her name, but I can certainly use the last 2 of, hey, I see that you're upset. Hey, I heard you yelling at your brother. What's going on? And then summarize it, right? Let them know you're listening. Let them know you care. Have that conversation. And it makes a huge difference. Again, it's just good conversation. It's good listening. It's good communication. At the workplace, right? Whether new project team or even if it's with your team members, let's say something new. Hey, it's what we do all the time, right? Hey, I'm Kevin Pennell. I'm going to be the IT project manager on this project. What's your name? You shake hands. Hey, I see you've come in from here or there. Like, you can use it without saying, hey, I see you're angry or upset or you're whatever emotion. It's the, I read the paper you sent ahead of time or the presentation. It was really good. Thanks a lot. In your summary, you're gonna have summaries of next steps at the end of project meetings or program meetings or even incident action planning meetings, and you're gonna summarize. All right, so in summary, next steps, and then you're gonna go through the stuff that everybody owns next. Right? That's 4 plays. Right? That's the 4 coaching plays. In public, how many times if you've been around, you've gone to bars or done this and that, you've seen people bump against each other and everybody postures or there's a problem, whatever. Right? You can de-escalate there. You can use exactly the 4 plays, right? Unless it's some egregious thing. You can use this with strangers in public, whether you're a law enforcement officer in public safety or just someone, that doesn't want to get in a fight, right? Or wants to help someone that looks like they're upset. Keeping in mind the safety things I mentioned, those 4 coaching plays: introduce yourself, ask them their name, note things that are happening, with them, and then summarize it, with the conversation. So those 4 plays are key. And again, they're pretty straightforward, which is great. And I'm sure not an accident, because when you're in a hot and heavy situation where you can use this, use CIT, use the elements of it, needs to be simple, right? Not really complicated. And so in talking about kind of some of those things, ways I've used it, so how do we measure success in this area? How can your programs measure success? So from CIT International Program Measures of Success, they say establish a network of relationships, right? Relationships. That's between Black people and cops. That's between just everyone and everyone, right? That's the focus now, and reform needs to be made in many areas. But the relationships can be between nonprofit organizations, government, private sector. What industries, what partners do you need to be involved with? Mental health, social services, health department, fire department, EMS. Get everyone together, stakeholders, family that have been impacted, and have all those people together as part of your program, and that you've had those relationships. So if it comes to find out that you could have used CIT and something happened, and it's like, well, have you worked with this population before or these programs? And the answer is no. Well, that's a gap, right? And so, again, I'm sure there's plenty of gap analysis that's going on with CIT now, just because, again, people somehow it keeps being coming up that, hey, we need to get more CIT, right, for mental health. Ongoing commitment from leaders, right? Leadership buy-in is huge early in any project, program, revisions, whatever. You have to get it, and it has to be real-based, not politics-based or trying to get favor-based. But the leader commitment that they will support this program, updates to it, whatever, and they'll be with you the whole time. You have to understand your community-wide response to mental health crisis, right? So you have to understand what's going to work best in different areas, who should respond where, get a feel for that, ask the community, but you have to have an understanding of it. You have to revise policies and procedures, which includes staffing and data collection, right? If you're not going to send police more to a CIT-like call, are you going to staff up your mental health department or your health department, or how are you going to do that? You have to figure it out. You have to train law enforcement 911 call takers, right? But I would also highly encourage, and I know some other, like I mentioned, some of our friends in some of the localities that I either worked in or with, they do this with fire and EMS as well. Why just enable the police to have these 4 coaching plays and the principles and the knowledge behind it when it's a public safety team that's out there all the time, right? Fire and EMS deal with folks, and so if police show up and this person's totally fine and then they leave because the scene's secure and fire and EMS are there and then they start having an issue, well, now fire and EMS are empowered with the skills to use their CIT. It's huge. The last of the measures of success from CIT International Program is to commit to ongoing improvement and engagement with partners, right? It has to be ongoing. It has to be reviewed, and it has to be fair and impartial and transparent, right? Case reviews, call reviews, frank discussions, who's involved, who's not involved, who's participating, who's not participating, because it's not a one-sided thing. It's just not. Nothing is. There's another reference that I looked at for this episode, and it has to do, it's called the 5-legged stool model, and it's about your CIT program, and I thought it was really good. It's from Nick Margiotta, who's a CIT coordinator for Phoenix Police Department. It's from 2015, and it's more than just training, and I think I've maybe touched on that, or hopefully have expressed that, but I'm going to talk about the 5 legs of the stool that he mentions, and again, I'll link this in the show notes so you can go read the whole thing. But the first one's police training, right? This started from a police interaction with someone in mental health that maybe didn't have the tools to deal with that person, or who knows how that person acted. I didn't read that case, but that's how it started. So police training, and again, police are called to do a lot of things that's not their primary deal, including crisis intervention, which is their primary deal now, or a lot of it. So it starts with police training. Community collaboration, right? Community collaboration. That's everyone in the community, of every ethnicity, of every socioeconomic status. It doesn't matter. Everyone has to be involved, not just point and go, you should change this, but get involved. Vibrant and accessible crisis system. So what this means, or at least from the 5-legged stool model, is the handoff, so the law enforcement to behavioral health handoff, needs to be set up pretty well, right? So in a lot of hospitals, there's rooms for psychiatric patients, and they're secured rooms. It's not a jail cell, but it's a locked door and it's one room. So the difference is it's a door, not bars. But is there a handoff there so that the handoff is from law enforcement that maybe they just gave them a ride, they weren't, didn't, cuff them or arrest them or something, and that's different policies that I'm not going to speak to, is, riding the car cuffed and all that jazz. But is there a good handoff from the point where law enforcement is taking custody of this person, or EMS or fire, and then hand it off to the behavioral health folks at the facility that they take them to? And is it accessible, right? So are there places to take folks that are in crisis beyond the jails? We touched on that way earlier. There has to be, right? Because that's a horrible place to put someone that's in crisis. But if there's not access or a better place to take them, then what's supposed to happen? And that's a tough call. You can't just give them a ride down the road and just drop them off at a friend's house, because you have no idea what's going to happen. The fourth thing is behavioral health staff training. So part of that is kind of the other side of it is behavioral health staff and mental health staff have to understand the role of law enforcement officers. And a great suggestion is do ride-alongs, right? Folks don't understand. And I was never a cop, so I have a smidge of having been, on calls and have friends and stuff with police, but I've never done their job. I've never pulled over a car and hoped they didn't shoot me when I was going to talk to them about driving or something. Like, it's never happened. And so, or gone to the crisis intervention calls first in by myself as a police officer. And so behavioral health staff training, and I think Nick Margiotta touches on, it's a great suggestion, is to understand what is law enforcement officer's role, and if do a ride along. So take them on a shift with you, with the law enforcement officers, and get a picture. And what are all the different things we see, from the mundane, this dog, my neighbor's dog poops on the grass, to, these people are abusing their children, like all these different things. You get a window into it. And the fifth of the five-legged stool, which is often called the forgotten leg, according to Margiotta, is family, consumers, and advocates collaborate and educate, right? So that's everyone affected by mental health, from the person to the family member to the people that are going to get called to respond and support, and then the system that's going to support them, because it has to be a whole system, but everybody has to be involved in the solution. That is the last of the five-legged stool model. So it's police training, community collaboration, vibrant, accessible crisis system, behavioral health staff training, and then family, consumers, and advocates collaborate and educate. Everybody working together. Just like I hope we in America start to work together better and have real discussions and not assumptions because of the way someone looks or votes or says. Like, America's great, and I have had disagreements with other folks, particularly veterans, maybe of other eras, where I 100% believe in free speech from the standpoint that, I served in the military because I chose to, right? And part of that, and part of the whole defending the country and all this stuff, is so that people can say and use their First Amendment rights. And give them that. And some folks disagree. It's like, I didn't fight, for or serve so that people could do that. I think absolutely, if things are wrong, then people should be able to speak to it. But I think, just like with developing a CIT program, just like with community collaboration and CIT and helping folks in mental crisis in this country, if we don't have real discussions and listen to each other, it could get heated. That's cool. But, keep it open-minded and not just throw everybody in a bucket. And the same label, positive, negative, etc., then we're not going to make that progress. And I think it's very fitting that the show is people, process, and progress, because people are 100% at the heart of how we're going to get through this and who need to change to help us all get through this. There are so many processes I can imagine, between the COVID stuff and police reform, and also realistic solutions to societal reform, right? Because it's not just the police. And it's not all police, and I 100% believe that, and I know it, for us to all make progress together, and we have to make progress together. So thank you all so much for listening, for spending just about an hour with me as I go through the CIT program. I hope this was informative and helpful. Please come back, give us a rating and review. Godspeed.